when she married her grandfather's political rival in order to repay her kindness. Everyone gloated and said, "The queen is doomed to die this time." Qinghuan rubbed his hands and said, "The most powerful king in the world will eventually become my subordinate." When she took the throne and crowned the capital with favor, the crowd exclaimed in a strange tone, "The princess's background is too low." Qinghuan looked at the four older brothers with great connections and said, "I am the legitimate daughter of the general's family." When she was favored by Jiaofang alone and had no concubines in the 6 palaces, everyone was struggling to the death and said, "Your Majesty, your son's life is thin." Qinghuan looked at the children who could form a cuju team and said, "Are you blind?" The divine man pushed her onto the bed and said, "Little sweetheart, let's have a few more." Chapter 1. Do you really like men? You are listening at novel full.audio. Qinghuan is dying. The tumultuous burial mound was filled with heavy rain, thunderous sounds shook the sky, black flashes rolled, and silver dragons pierced through the sky. Her head was exposed to the ground, her neck was buried in the soil, and her face was covered in blood and mud. Hold on, I'll take you to see a doctor. In front of Qinghuan, a man knelt down on both knees, his hands constantly digging up the soil that had buried Qinghuan. Even though his nails were twisted and his bones were exposed, he stubbornly refused to stop. "King Qi," Qinghuan called out to the man, and the blood on her face turned pale red from the rain. It flowed down her cheeks and into her mouth, with a sweet smell but a bitter taste on her tongue. "Don't talk, I'll take you away, don't close your eyes, don't." The man didn't look up, his hands continued to dig the soil, his voice unable to conceal his anxiety and fear. Qinghuan saw the man like this and wanted to tell him not to dig anymore. She couldn't live anymore, but her words reached her lips, but she couldn't say much. "Huang, escaping your marriage in this lifetime is because I, Qinghuan, am blind." Finally, Qinghuan said this sentence. She is the granddaughter of Prime Minister Yu Qian. In the 10th year of Jiao, the emperor issued an edict to marry her, allowing her to marry Prince Qi and marry him for 100 years. The divine decree bestows marriage, and theoretically no one dares to disobey it. Unfortunately, Qinghuan did not marry. Just for 2 reasons that make her laugh every time she thinks of them. It is said that Prince Qi Changsun Tao had a good male personality and spent his days in and out with the handsome staff. Women who marry him will definitely stay widowed for a lifetime. Another thing is that Qinghuan has someone in her heart, and she stubbornly only wants to marry her crush. Qinghuan looked at the man repeatedly, tirelessly digging the soil and wanting to dig her out. He couldn't judge whether a man's good masculinity was true or not, but her desire to marry her lover was a real joke. A joke that has been infatuated for many years, risking his life to resist orders and elope with the other party, enduring all the hardships, but ultimately being interrupted by the other party and buried alive in a mass grave. "Huang, stop digging, it's useless." With resentment in his heart, Qinghuan let out a bitter smile and spoke to the man again. "No, I finally found you, don't let you leave me again. Don't." Huang's voice was almost pleading, afraid that she would leave at any time. Seeing how King Qi treated her, and recalling the heartless feelings of the dog-man Qinghuan, Qinghuan's heart seemed to be touched by a very thin thread, and she came back to her senses with a heart-wrenching pain. In a daze, King Qi placed his hands under her armpits and pulled them up with force. With a soft sound, her body burst out of the ground, loosely resting in his arms. The blue cloth skirt was filthy, and the feet under the skirt were covered in blood and flesh. The remaining limbs were covered in dense black ants, shuttling back and forth, gnawing on the remaining flesh and blood. No wonder it hurts so much. It turns out the meat has been eaten by ants, Qinghuan joked. No, this scene burned the eyes of King Qi. He suddenly rubbed Qinghuan into his arms, tightly gripping him, and his lips trembled slightly. "You won't be okay, I'll save you if you're okay. I'll go find the best doctor in the world to save you." Qinghuan couldn't see the face of King Qi, only feeling one hot tear after another dripping onto his neck, rolling into his collar, and finally landing on his vest. For a moment, she had no time to ponder why her fiancé, who had only met once, was so deeply in love with her. She felt her heart tighten, and the warm droplets of water seemed to be slowly digging through her heart, until they pierced through her entire heart. I didn't expect that in my entire life, besides my mother, there was someone else who was so sad for me when she was dying. It's really good. Qinghuan coughed a few times and tried hard to smile. No, don't say die, don't give up, I will definitely save you, the man interrupted Qinghuan urgently. Qinghuan smiled and didn't take the man's words seriously. She knew about her own body. Huang, before dying, may I ask you a question? You say, as long as you ask, I will answer, the man said urgently. Huang, do you really like men? Qinghuan spoke weakly, and almost as soon as she finished speaking, the man let go of his embrace. He widened his eyes and looked at her in extreme shock. Look at me, everyone is dying, and I'm still asking such boring questions, that's all. Qinghuan coughed again, her voice becoming even weaker. Huang, I'm leaving now. I'm sorry for keeping you searching for so long and causing you sadness. If there is an afterlife, I will definitely repay your kindness in finding me. After saying these words, Qinghuan slowly closed her eyes amidst the man's heart-wrenching cries, and a broken smile froze at the corner of her mouth. She couldn't hear the sound of "Gur." Chapter 2. My Marriage. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Qinghuan, let me tell you, Shifu is here. If you don't marry, you have to marry me. If you die tomorrow, you can only die in the Qi prince's mansion. The voice of anger suddenly rang in her ears, and Qinghuan, lying in bed, was startled. Suddenly, she opened her eyes and saw her father, the attendant of the Ministry of Personnel at that time, Yu Jian, angrily throwing a wedding dress onto her and speaking aggressively. Yes, sister. Although King Qi has a good masculine style, he is still a prince. As the younger brother of the pilgrimage, you will definitely have endless wealth and honor after marriage. Why can't you think of suicide? Turning around, it was the voice of the eldest sister, Qinghuan. Your sister is right. As a commoner, being able to marry the king of Qi is already a good thing that you can't even dream of finding. You dare to commit suicide by jumping into the pond with your head in the water, Yu Jian sneered angrily. Qinghuan struggled to blink her eyes. She looked at the enraged Yu Jian, then at the proud Qinghuan, and then at the room she was in. Her expression gradually shocked, indicating that this was clearly the boudoir before she eloped with Qingzhen. Could it be she didn't die? Is it surprising that she has been reborn like some folk tales have written, and it was reborn the day before marrying Prince Qi Changsun Tao? Memories flooded in, scenes swirling in my mind. The emperor bestowed marriage to the daughter of the Yu family and the king of Qi, but did not name them. The eldest daughter, Qinghuan, was unwilling to marry Prince Qi, who had both a good male demeanor and disagreed with her grandfather's political views. This marriage fell on her, a commoner who could be discarded at any time. After hearing this news, she threw herself into the pond but failed to commit suicide, so she fled with Qingzhen the night before getting married. During the 3 years of ups and downs with Qingzhen, she tasted the hardships of the world, but she never regretted it until the news of Yu's daughter marrying the crown prince as a concubine came. Qingzhen got drunk and revealed the truth that he had admired Qinghuan since childhood, and even led her to elope for her. She looked completely unrecognizable and asked Qingzhen if he had ever been interested in her, even if it was just a little bit. Qingzhen humiliated her with a detestable expression, and finally broke her limbs, burying her alive on the chaotic grave. These scenes were repeated several times in his mind, and Qinghuan finally accepted the fact of her rebirth. She suppressed her bone-burning hatred and sneered back, asking, if Sister Chang thinks this is a good marriage, why don't you marry yourself? Qinghuan bit her lower lip and was left speechless when asked. She looked helplessly at Yu Jian. Yu Jian's narrow and long eyes were cold and piercing, and his gaze was extremely cold and ruthless. He became furious and roared, "You Qinghuan, don't talk to your elder sister in a strange way. I'll leave my words here. If you don't nod, I'll take your mother Chu's life. I'll ask you again, whether you're getting married or not." Yu Qinghuan looked up at Yu Jian and suddenly burst into laughter, with tears streaming down the corners of his eyes. If her father gives her a little love, how could she end up dying in her past life? Because she has never received her father's pity, she would hold Qinghuan's hypocrisy as a precious treasure in her palm. Yu Qinghuan casually wiped away a tear and said, "I'll get married." If the queen is left alone, will she continue to be a dog in the prime minister's mansion? Yu Qinghuan repeated, "I'll get married." Yu Jian received Yu Qinghuan's answer and left satisfied. "Big sister," Yu Qinghuan called out to Yu Qinghuan, her voice like shattered jade. The red-layered cloud brocade of Haitang moved, and Yu Qinghuan stood in front of her like a cluster of peonies and jade. Her face couldn't conceal the smile of Shaorandiji, saying, "What last words does Qimei have?" Having a beautiful face, even being sharp and harsh is so touching, that's why it's praised in the palm of your hand. Yu Qinghuan felt bitter in his heart, but his face was very calm. "It was you who brought Qinghuan closer to me. You already know," Yu Qinghuan smiled and then resumed as usual. "But you know how no one will believe you. In this family, I am the beloved young lady, and you are not even as important as my dog." Yu Qinghuan remained expressionless and said, "Why? When I was a child, the crown prince's cousin always liked to look for you every time he came to the prime minister's mansion." "Why do you think so?" said Yu Qinghuan with a somewhat sinister expression on her beautiful face. "I see." Yu Qing laughed happily, wrapping himself in frost and jade. In the next moment, she grabbed the pillow and slammed a note at Yu Qinghuan's head. Yu Qinghuan couldn't resist and was immediately knocked to the ground, with a disheveled bun that described it as tragic. Yu Qinghuan quickly rode on Yu Qinghuan, pulling her hair tightly and slapping her hard. She grabbed her neck and said with a resounding tone, "Sister, from now on, as long as I live for a day, I will never die with you. Whatever you like, I will turn it into smoke and clouds, and the rest of your life will only be a bleak one with wind and rain." Yu Qinghuan shouted angrily as she took off her socks and stuffed them into her mouth. "I advise you to endure. I'm not afraid of punishment, but you dare not lose face," she said. After speaking, Yu Qinghuan picked up Yu Qinghuan, dragged her to the door, threw her out with force, and slammed the door shut. Being soft on the enemy is being irresponsible to oneself. Reviving her life, her secret is to no longer live in injustice. Unfortunately, she is not strong enough to do whatever she wants with these bad wolves. One day, she will surely trample on the noble heads of these people under her feet, and that day, she believed it wouldn't be too far away. Chapter 3. Husband's Man. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Yu Qinghuan did not come to trouble her as expected. The next day. The morning breeze and the waning moon, the sky is hazy and bright. Xingyang, who was sent from the palace, led a few maids into the room to open her face, comb her hair, put on makeup, and dress Yu Qinghuan. Next, climb onto the sedan chair, welcome the greenhouse, worship heaven and earth, and drink Hejin wine. It took a whole day to complete a set of complicated formalities. "Qi Chang Sun Tao, what kind of person are you?" Yu Qinghuan sat on the bed, listening to the sound of silk and bamboo outside gradually subside. In his mind, he couldn't help but imagine the scenes before his death in his previous life. She struggled for a few days, which was the biggest doubt that troubled her. In addition, she wanted to get rid of the Yu family and not repeat the mistakes of her previous life. Therefore, she willingly put on her wedding dress and married into the Qi prince's mansion to become his queen. Yu Qinghuan's heart tightened slightly, pondering how to test it later. She had thought about countless scenes of them meeting, but she didn't expect that Chang Sun Tao never stepped into her room again. Yu Qinghuan summoned the little girl guarding the door and asked, realizing that Chang Sun Tao had already been staying in his room. All the things in my past life, are they all illusions? Take me to meet King Qi, Qinghuan ordered as he removed the 9 phoenix crowns from his head and threw them forcefully onto the ground. The little girl's face turned pale with fear, and she timidly led Qinghuan around the royal mansion for a long distance. Her legs were sore from walking, and she finally walked to Changsun Tao's bedroom, Mowu residence. If you want to be unexpected, you need to speak up first. Qinghuan pushed open the little girl and kicked open the door. Inside, Changsun Tao, who was supposed to appear on the night of the wedding, was now rolling with another man. One up, one down. The two of them behaved intimately, as if their ears and hair were rubbing against each other. Is this the man of the legendary Prince Qinghuan covered his slowly expanding mouth and looked at the man being pressed down by Changsun Tao with a pair of divine eyes. But seeing him with a beautiful appearance, clear eyes and eyebrows, and a graceful demeanor, just like the orchid and jade tree standing in the fairyland of Langhuan. A man who looks more and more like a prince. The two of them turned their heads to look at her at the same time. In the next moment, Changsun Tao immediately bounced back and said in a cool tone, "Xia Yun, you go down first." Qinghuan watched Xia Yun leave, dispelling the chaotic speculations in her mind and calming her mind. She turned her head and looked at Changsun Tao without hesitation. "Why didn't you come to the bridal chamber?" Changsun Tao straightened his clothes and knelt in front of the table, his expression indifferent. "I thought the queen had a clear idea," he said. Qinghuan asked, "The prince suspects that I am a meticulous worker sent by my grandfather." Changsun Tao let out a cold snort and didn't speak, which was considered a tacit agreement. Silence caused his body temperature to drop sharply, and his calm yet majestic demeanor was intimidating. With a fierce and oppressive aura, Qinghuan's heart skipped a beat in fear. He forced himself to remain calm, clenched his fists, and loudly said, "Not every member of the Yu family wants to oppose you. I'm not a spy." Changsun Tao glanced at her and said, "Then prove it to me." Qinghuan leaned over and pressed his hands on the small table, his eyes burning as he looked at Changsun Tao. His slender body was like an unbreakable bamboo. "How can I prove it?" Changsun Tao said seriously, "If you want a woman to be loyal, you must first occupy her body. Since you are so sincere, then let go. Only when you become the woman of my king will I consider whether to believe you or not." As he spoke, Changsun Tao suddenly leaned over, his burning breath spraying on Qinghuan's face, making it tingling and itchy. And his hand fell down to her waist along her cheek, gently lifting the tassel ribbon around her waist. The faint and rich aura of nobility enveloped her everywhere, and Qinghuan suppressed the discomfort of approaching the man, staring intently at Changsun Tao with a faint smile on his lips. His eyes are not swayed by any emotions or desires. She knew that all of this was just a teasing probing. "Huang, this way of taking off is too slow. It's not like we each take off separately." Changsun Tao's hand stiffened in vain. Qinghuan couldn't help but burst out laughing, and Changsun Tao narrowed his eyes dangerously. He suddenly reached out and threw her to the ground, causing him to instantly collapse. "The queen is so impatient that I don't want to ask her to wait long." Changsun Tao lay beside Qinghuan, holding her neck with one hand and her cheeks with the other. His thin, colored lips slowly leaned in. Qinghuan took a breath and instinctively wanted to push away Changsun Tao, but her reason told her that it was absolutely not possible. In the competition between the two, whoever can't hold their breath first will lose. 1, 2, 3 times in the room where the needle could be heard, the heartbeat of the two gradually became consistent. Bang bang. Just as my lips were about to touch, a knock on the door sounded, followed by a pleasant male voice, "Prince, it's urgent." The two of them almost breathed a sigh of relief in secret at the same time. Changsun Tao bounced up, straightened his clothes, and threw a splash of ink at Qinghuan, giving him a meaningful glance before turning around and leaving in big strides. Qinghuan looked at his peerless and serene figure and smiled softly. "No matter what kind of skin you wear, I will peel it off and see which one is the real you. Chapter 4. The Prince's Effective Guidance. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When Qinghuan stayed in Mowu until Mao, he saw Changsun Tao pushing the door and entering. He wore a plain robe, which made his face look like a cool jade. Casually throwing down a set of rouge-colored palace attire, Changsun Tao turned around and left. According to the rules, the bride should go to the palace to pay respects to the Empress Dowager. About an hour later, the two of them arrived together at the Qingning Palace where the Empress Dowager resided. The dignified Empress Dowager sat high on the main throne, with the Empress sitting on her lower right head and some concubines accompanying her on both sides. My son pays respects to his mother. Changsun Tao swayed and knelt down. The Empress Dowager looked at her energetic young son with a loving expression on her face. Among her two biological sons, compared to her eldest son Emperor Jiao, her love for Changsun Tao was unreserved. I pay my respects to the Empress Dowager and wish her good health and blessings for thousands of years. Qinghuan bent down and knelt down, performing a proper ritual of capital inspection. In an instant, countless glances focused on her, and even the Empress Dowager couldn't help but glance at her again. Qinghuan hung his head slightly, his face calm and allowing everyone to scrutinize him. Free gift, give a seat. The Empress Dowager spoke, her old voice splitting through the stale air. Qinghuan, along with Changsun Tao, thanked and sat down with dignity and generosity in every move, without picking out any mistakes. The Empress cast a deep glance at Qinghuan, her red lips parted and said, I used to hear my sister praise Princess Qi, but today I see that she truly lives up to her reputation. Her demeanor is dignified, and she is completely different from ordinary women who are not skilled at it. The Empress is the legitimate aunt of Qinghuan, and her sister is naturally referred to as the legitimate mother of Qinghuan, the head of the Prime Minister's household, Yuan Shi. Qinghuan sneered from the bottom of his heart. The Empress's words not only praised her legitimate mother for being virtuous, magnanimous, and skillful in teaching her daughter, but also indirectly mocked her status as an illegitimate daughter. Qinghuan looked at Changsun Tao beside him without leaving a trace. He seemed calm and lowered his head to drink tea, without any intention of helping himself. It seems that he wants to face it alone. Qinghuan smiled slightly, showing the expression he should have received praise for, and replied softly, Empress, this is all thanks to the prince. Before I got married, I did not learn court etiquette. It was the prince who taught me for a few hours last night, so as not to be impolite in public. This statement is very well spoken, which not only refutes the Empress's praise of her legitimate mother, but also reflects the deep love between her husband and the prince. The Empress's eyes flashed fiercely, and finally turned into a soft smile. The love between King Qi and his wife is truly envious of others. As she spoke, the Empress turned her head to look at the Empress Dowager and said with a smile, Mother, when I saw Princess Qi, I remembered how I used to disturb my sister at the Prime Minister's mansion before marrying His Majesty. The garden of the Prime Minister's mansion was renovated very exquisitely, and the scenery was simply wonderful, comparable to a fairyland. The Empress Dowager sighed and said, the gardens of the Prime Minister's mansion are famous in the capital. The AI family also wanted to see the scenery, but unfortunately they never had the chance. The Empress said, Mother, I have an idea. Since Princess Qi is here, we should not let her paint a picture of the spring scenery in the Prime Minister's garden. This way, Mother and I can enjoy the beautiful scenery without having to physically visit. The Empress spoke up, and the concubines agreed, I believe the Empress has a great idea. The Empress Dowager nodded and turned her gaze to Qinghuan before slowly speaking, what does Princess Qi think? Qinghuan's gaze swept over the Empress, revealing a subtle coldness hidden beneath her broad and benevolent appearance. She understood, and the Empress felt that her little illegitimate daughter did not understand the art of painting, and wanted her to lose face in front of everyone. The brief silence was seen as a refusal, and the Empress Dowager frowned with displeasure. Changsun Tao, who had been motionless like a mountain, spoke up and said, "Your sister.in.law, the scene drawn by the queen may not be the same as what you saw back then. Since you are so interested, why don't you draw the magnificent scenery of the past and let us all see how it is?" The Empress's smile remained soft as ever. "King Qi, no matter how beautiful the scenery was back then, it only existed in the past. How can we let the Queen Mother and all the sisters see the past?" King Qi declined, "It's because the Queen's painting skills were not good." As soon as the corner of Chang Sun Tao's lips moved, he was snatched by Qinghuan and said, "It's my good fortune to be able to paint for the Empress Dowager and Empress Dowager." The Empress's face was even more smiling, with a proud curve on her lips, as if she had already seen an uneducated illegitimate woman, smiling generously in public. Qinghuan saw the Empress's undisguised thoughts and spoke softly, "Empress Dowager, if you don't have a colorful head, you can't rely on me. If the painting of my body matches the Empress's wishes, I will have the audacity to ask for a reward." A small illegitimate woman, beyond her means. The Empress let out a cold snort in her heart and said confidently, "If Queen Qi can create a painting that satisfies our palace, the treasures in our palace's treasury will be chosen by Queen Qi." Qinghuan smiled contentedly and said, "It's a deal." The Queen ordered everyone to set up painting supplies, including high-quality wolf hair, thin rice paper as cicada wings, and a complete set of elegant and exquisite ink materials. The palace maid who was waiting on the side picked up ink and polished it casually. Qinghuan stood in front of the table, calmly observing the slightly strange expressions of the crowd. Seeing Sun Tao's gaze fixed on the few tubes of ink on the desk, Qinghuan finally knew where the problem lay. Chapter 5. Unexpectedly. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Empress, please replace me with someone who knows how to serve me. Qinghuan bowed and smiled lightly. "What I want to paint is scenery, so I should choose a smoke mill made of tung oil. The ink color of the smoke mill is deep and glossy, which is most suitable for painting landscapes with varying shades and details. However, this palace maid is grinding this dull and unremarkable pine smoke ink on my body. I believe she doesn't even know how to use pine smoke ink to paint characters' hair. With such a palace maid serving me, I definitely can't paint the scenery of the Prime Minister's garden well." Chang Sun Tao's eyebrows twitched slightly, and a strange expression in his eyes flashed. "Empress Dowager, it's because you're reluctant to part with the treasures in the warehouse. That's why you've arranged for such a palace maid to serve you." The smile on the Empress's face instantly faded, and the nearby palace maid being knelt down in front of the Empress and the Empress Dowager, her face alternating green and white, saying, "It's all my fault. I don't understand the elegance of painting. That's why I pointed the wrong finger at someone to serve." Before the Empress could speak, she was snatched by Chang Sun Tao and said, "The people around Empress Dowager have fallen to this point, that's all. I'll personally take care of the princess's writing." The Queen's expression was difficult to see to the extreme, and she almost stood up at once, but she still restrained herself. As the Queen, her dignity does not allow her to get angry on the spot. Only by not getting angry can she show her maternal grace in the world. Suddenly, a gaze caught her, but the Empress Dowager looked towards her with a pensive expression. The Empress dared not offend the Empress Dowager, so she quickly adjusted her expression and put on a look of self-blame and guilt. "King Qi, Queen Qi, I have not disciplined my servants well in this palace. I have made you both laugh. Someone, take being in this foolish palace maid back to Fengzhou Palace and wait for their release." Qing smiled happily and made way for a seat for Chang Sun Tao. When the ink and pigments were ready, Qinghuan spread out the rice paper, and the wolf hair in her hand was as graceful as a wandering dragon. Soon, the spring scenery of the entire garden fell onto the rice paper, with a complete charm and a beautiful artistic conception. "Please have the Queen Mother and all the ladies observe the painting." Qinghuan and Chang Sun Tao unfolded the painting together, and everyone couldn't take their eyes off it anymore. That small piece of rice paper showcases the spring scenery of the Xiangfu garden to the fullest, as if it could be truly immersive at a glance. The Empress looked up and immediately lost her voice. She was prepared with a bunch of sarcastic words, but had no chance to say them. Empress, I don't know if I can get the lottery. Qinghuan's black and white eyes flickered, revealing the innocence she should have at her age, like a child begging for a reward. The queen gritted her teeth and squeezed out a few words from between her teeth with a stiff expression. That's nature. Bidong, take the queen to the warehouse to pick things. Qinghuan bowed comfortably and said, Thank you very much, Empress Dowager. I'm a bit tired. How about letting Bidong help me choose one? The Empress immediately laughed and rejected, if Princess Qi doesn't go in person, she will say that this palace is stingy again. Qinghuan glanced at Changsun Tao and saw him nod. Fengzhou Palace is not far from Qingning Palace, and Bidong lags behind Qinghuan by half a step. As she leads the way, she says, the queen consort is good at drawing. I have had the privilege of seeing the paintings made by palace painters for the Empress, but none of them are as good as the ones painted by the queen consort. Qing laughed happily but remained silent. Several palace maids who were approaching were asked to bow to one side, and Bidong's eyes flickered as she continued, Queen, when you enter Fengzhou Palace later, please be gentle. Li Meiren passed away due to difficult childbirth, and the Empress pitied the princess's loneliness. She personally took care of her in Fengzhou Palace. At this moment, the princess is afraid to be sleeping. Qinghuan frowned and paused, saying, Since that's the case, then I won't go. You're following the Empress and I'm sure you have good eyesight. Can you help me choose one? Bidong firmly said, Empress Dowager, this is not acceptable. Empress Dowager insists that you personally choose. Qinghuan looked at Bidong and a cloud of suspicion flashed in his heart. Why did Bidong suddenly mention the little princess? What exactly does the Empress want to do? Chapter 6. AI Jia wants you to be buried together. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Empress Dowager, what's wrong with the princess? In the Qingning Palace, a young palace maid ran in, tripped over the threshold, and fell to the ground. She then knelt down in front of the Empress Dowager. What's going on? The queen stood up suddenly. The Empress Dowager and the other concubines were shocked and pale. The little palace maid said with a blue face and white lips, Just now, Princess Qi went to see the little princess, and then Sister Bidong found out that the little princess had passed out and had no reaction to calling her. Empress Linger, Huang, was at a loss and completely disregarded her demeanor. She ran out with the hem of her skirt in hand. Go and seek the imperial physician, Changsun Tao gave a faint command, his calm face difficult to decipher. He helped the Empress Dowager up and a group of people marched towards Fengzhou Palace in a grand manner. Qinghuan, poisonous woman, dare you harm my spirit? As soon as everyone arrived at the entrance of Fengzhou Palace, the queen's hysterical voice came from inside. Inside the hall, the queen's crimson eyes asked, and Qinghuan stood quietly on the side. The Empress saw that Sun Tao supported the Empress Dowager and walked in. She quickly rushed to her and cried bitterly, Mother, Linger is not doing well. You have to make decisions for Linger. The Empress Dowager sat around the Empress and her face darkened as if she could drip water. Help the Empress up, what does she look like crying and crying? As she spoke, her sharp gaze fixed on Qinghuan, saying, Princess Qi, what explanation do you have? What else can be explained? Qinghuan sneered inwardly. The Empress made it clear that she wanted to frame her, but she didn't know whether this was simply aimed at her or for an unknown purpose. Qinghuan instinctively looked at Changsun Tao, but saw his expression calm, as if he were an outsider watching. Unexpectedly hanging up high, is it a test or just wanting to watch her die? With just one glance, Qinghuan shifted her gaze to the Empress Dowager and said, Empress Dowager, I didn't even know this was the princess's room before. Just now, Bitong brought my concubine here and said she wanted to get the key. Then, I heard a weak and rapid breathing sound. Just as I walked to the bed to see what was going on, Bitong suddenly appeared crying and shouting, saying that I want to harm the princess. You also know what happened next. Full of nonsense and eloquent words, the empress angrily rebuked with a stern tone. As soon as you arrived, the princess had an accident, so you must have tampered with it. Qinghuan said calmly, Empress Dowager, I have no grievances or enmities with the princess. Why do you want to harm her? The empress spoke sternly and said, Don't think that this palace doesn't know. You don't even want to marry King Qi, so you have invested in Lake Mingji. You must be jealous of your Majesty for giving this marriage to the Yu family, but you are unable to retaliate. In the end, you will vent your anger on the young princess Qinghuan. Why are you so cruel? Qinghuan said, Didn't Empress Dowager praise my mother for teaching me well just now? Why did she suddenly say that I have so many concubines that it's not good to talk about it? The prince is still the most handsome man in the Qin dynasty with power and influence. Why don't I want to marry? The empress was extremely angry, leaning against Bitong's arms and holding onto her collar with one hand. She cried bitterly and said, Qinghuan, if the spirit of our palace has any major or minor problems, we will definitely pay for your life. Qinghuan was about to say something when the imperial physician and Emperor Jiao arrived on both feet. Emperor Jiao looked at the crowd with a stern expression, and finally fixed his gaze on Qinghuan, instantly stirring up an undisguised killing intent. The imperial physician trembled and finished his pulse, sweating profusely as he said, Your Majesty, I cannot touch the pulse of the little princess. The empress had completely collapsed in Bitong's arms, and the emperor took a step back, completely disregarding the emperor's demeanor. He pointed at Qinghuan, trembling all over and said, Someone, drag out Princess Qi and chop her off. The ferocious imperial guards rushed forward and pretended to grab Qinghuan's arm. Slow down. A figure stood in front of Qinghuan, Brother, there are many doubts about this matter. Before we understand the truth of the matter, we must not hastily kill my younger brother's wife. Qinghuan lifted her eyes, and the figure in front of her was tall and straight, with drooping black hair falling down to her waist. It looked somewhat elusive, as if she could fly away with the wind at any moment. Regardless of the purpose of Chang Xuantao's maintenance at this time, the action of protecting her behind her still made her inexplicably feel a bit comforted. But after experiencing the incident of Qin Zhen, Qinghuan never dared to entrust her safety to anyone, even her husband, who had shown kindness to her in his past life. Your Majesty, I have seen the symptoms of the little princess before. Since the imperial physician is useless, let me try it out. If I can save the little princess, please treat me fairly. If I cannot save the little princess, let your Majesty handle it. Qinghuan walked out from behind Chang Xuntao and said loudly. Don't make a fuss. Chang Xuntao glanced at her with a warning in his eyes. Qinghuan ignored his warning and resolutely said, Your Majesty, the princess's life cannot be delayed. The imperial physician looked dissatisfied at Qinghuan and said, Princess Qi, I really can't feel the princess's pulse. Qinghuan insisted, Your Majesty, the princess's life and death are within your imagination. The empress wept to tears, while Emperor Jiao remained silent. Finally, the Empress Dowager spoke up, Princess Qi, let me give you a try. If you can't save the little princess, even if the emperor doesn't speak, the AI family will let you be buried with her. Chapter 7. I ask you what your heart is. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Qinghuan walked up to the little princess's bed and bent down to observe her. However, she saw her eyes tightly closed, her mouth slightly open, her face flushed, and her pulse was palpable, clearly entering a state of imminent death. The cause of the illness is indeed the same as she had just guessed. Give me the needle. Qinghuan dared not delay for a moment and reached out to the imperial physician for a silver needle. The imperial physician was stunned and couldn't react for half a day. Qinghuan Tao pushed aside the imperial physician and pulled out a silver needle from the medicine box, handing it to Qinghuan. Qinghuan took the silver needle and without hesitation, injected it into the acupoints of the little princess, Lao Gong, Bai Hui, and Yongquan. Then he turned around and shouted, "Prepare half of the money for Jiamu. Rinse the back end with warm water and give it to me quickly." The palace officials hurriedly went to handle it. Then, Qinghuan said again, "Take a spoonful of sapphire powder and mix it with a bowl of warm water, then bring it to me. Hurry up." The palace officials quickly went to handle it again. In no time, both things were ready. Qinghuan took off the silver needle inserted into the person, took a sip of sapphire water, pinched the little princess's cheek, and sprayed sapphire water into her throat. After repeating this several times, the little princess finally let out a soft snort and then began to cry softly, feeling weak and powerless. Qinghuan did not delay, holding the little princess in her arms with one hand and pouring pepper water into her mouth with a medicine bowl in the other. The little princess choked a few times and suddenly coughed, followed by a loud cry. After finishing all of this, Qing fell to the ground exhausted, sweating profusely on his forehead and his clothes on his back soaking wet. Before she could breathe a sigh of relief, the empress rushed up and pointed at Qinghuan, her face grim, and said, "Qinghuan, you said you didn't harm the imperial physician who had been on duty for decades and couldn't figure out the reason. Why did you find out that you must have wanted to show off in public? That's why you used a strange method to harm the lord in advance, and then publicly rescued the princess back to you, this wicked and vicious woman. In order to gain fame and reputation, you even didn't let go of a baby." Qinghuan wiped the sweat off her forehead and said coldly, "The empress really values my body. My body is not as vicious as you think." Speaking, Qinghuan stood up and took out the brocade quilt that covered the princess's body. He then found another quilt to cover the little princess's body, and walked to the side to pull out the golden hairpin on her head, cutting through the brocade quilt in his hand. The brocade quilt was cut open, and the goose down sandwiched in it immediately flew down. Qinghuan spread the brocade quilt in front of the crowd and said, "The brocade quilt was mixed with reed fluff." The brocade quilt was covered on the princess's body, and the princess inhaled the reed fluff that seeped out from the brocade quilt for a long time, causing asthma. Because she did not receive timely treatment, she suffocated. Speaking, Qinghuan looked at the empress with a cold expression and said, "But there's one thing I don't understand. Judging from the severity of the princess's illness, her symptoms will last for at least 1 or 2 hours. When she first falls ill, she will inevitably cough and breathe much faster than usual. But why didn't anyone realize that when I came here just now, there was no one guarding her? That's why." Qinghuan Tao narrowed his eyes in surprise and looked at the imperial physician, asking, "Dr. Zhao, is what the queen's words are based on?" Zhao Yui, who was named, said nervously, "Pepper eye and sapphire are indeed medicines for treating asthma. Children who inhale small smoke can indeed cause asthma over time." Upon receiving the answer from the imperial physician Zhao, Qinghuan looked at the empress with a smile on her face and said, "Empress, today is my first time entering the palace. I wouldn't even have prepared this brocade quilt containing reed fluff. The princess had an accident. The empress didn't first deal with the derelict servant, but instead accused me of being the murderer of the princess. She also brought up the inexplicable reason why my concubine retaliated for hating the emperor's marriage. I want to ask the empress, what is your intention in targeting me like this?" Chapter 8. Prince, my concubine is afraid. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Suddenly, Qinghuan changed her aggressive posture and lifted her sleeves to cry, "What did I do wrong? The empress wants to treat me like this." After half a sound, Qinghuan wiped her tears and threw herself into the arms of Qinghuan Tao. She said with grievances, "Prince, I'm afraid of you." Qinghuan Tao was caught off guard by Qinghuan and pounced. He couldn't help but be taken aback. Soon, with his unfamiliar and stiff movements, he patted Qinghuan's back and coaxed him softly, "Princess, don't be afraid. Your mother and brother will definitely make decisions for you." The Empress's eyes were filled with coldness, and she suppressed the urge to crush Qinghuan. She knelt down in fear in front of Emperor Jiao and said, "Your Majesty, although Ling'er was not my biological child, she was raised by my side from birth. I treated her like my own flesh and blood. It was only when Ling'er had an accident that I was so anxious that I mistakenly thought it was the hands and feet of Princess Qi. I kindly request your Majesty's guidance. Never mention the dereliction of duty by the servants of Fengzhou Palace." Emperor Jiao remained silent, with an unpredictable expression on his face. The Empress Dowager looked at Emperor Jiao and then at Changsun Tao, and finally spoke wearily, "Zhaohua, take Princess Qi back first. The AI family will explain this to Princess Qi, and the rest will go down. If the AI family hears only a few words about today's situation, they will definitely punish the Emperor and Empress severely. You two will stay." Qinghuan tightly embraced Changsun Tao's arm and walked out, looking like a quail. At noon, the sun is shining brightly. Walking to the corridor, Qinghuan casually released Changsun Tao's hand and deliberately slowed down a few steps to follow behind him. Changsun Tao silently walked ahead, with a sparse robe and wide sleeves, and a dragon and phoenix posture. His steps were heavy and steady, as if the distance between each step was the same. Qinghuan followed him like this, just a few feet away, like an insurmountable abyss. She thought she could see him clearly, but found that she knew nothing about him beyond the abyss except for his identity, name, and appearance. During this distance, she walked cautiously, step by step, afraid of accidentally touching his taboos. Unexpectedly, Changsun Tao suddenly stopped and turned to walk towards her quickly. In the next moment, her hand was already held by him. She instinctively broke free, but he held it even tighter. "If you have something to say at home, don't get angry here." Changsun Tao turned his head and looked at her with starry eyes, his lips curling up with a warm smile that could melt the ice and snow. Qinghuan was taken aback for a moment, and footsteps echoed from behind. It turned out to be a patrol guard. "No wonder we have to act." But she still took a strange step and followed him step by step. She didn't know what was wrong with her. Perhaps she was confused by the phrase, "Go home," he said. She thought that it was because she wanted to have a home too much that she couldn't help but be controlled by him. On the carriage, Changsun Tao regained his indifference and estrangement, picked up a book and read it, as if the scene of holding hands just now had never existed. Qinghuan had been pondering everything that had just happened. Once he was found guilty of plotting to harm the little princess, both the Yu family and the Qi prince's mansion could not escape their ties. My grandfather controlled the court, and it is understandable that Emperor Jiao was afraid. However, why did even King Qi plan on it, and why was he so eager to take action today? Or rather, it's just a simple coincidence. Qinghuan's lips moved and closed again and again, finally looking at him and probing, saying, "If it weren't for your Majesty's instructions, the Empress wouldn't dare to take action against the princess, and the imperial physician wouldn't assert that the princess was hopeless. Even if I were foolish, I could see that this was a deliberate attack. Why did you agree to let me go with Bitong to Fengzhou Palace? If the Empress Dowager hadn't noticed the clues and let me go to save the princess, I'm afraid I might already be dead by now. Are you treating me like this? Is it a test, or do you want my life? If I don't have the ability to resist, what should you do?" Changsun Tao's voice was so indifferent that there were no emotional ups and downs. "If you want the Empress's favor, wasn't it your initiative to bring it up? This is your own choice, and everyone is responsible for their decisions. When you want to benefit from the Empress and tear her face, you should think about the consequences you will face. If you are not smart enough, then don't act smart. If you don't have the ability to deal with all crises, you should avoid causing trouble. Being such a person is even more important than being a queen." Chang Suantao's answer perfectly avoided all the answers she wanted to know, and Yu Qinghuan became even more puzzled, holding his arm tightly and not speaking. What is there between King Qi and Emperor Jiao that she doesn't know? Is their brotherly relationship truly as brotherly and respectful as it appears on the surface? Chang Suantao looked up at her and then focused his gaze on the scroll, continuing, "Don't be discouraged. According to your qualifications, if you are in an ordinary wealthy family, you do have the capital to be proud, but your identity and environment determine that you don't have the qualification to be stubborn. You must learn to restrain your sharpness and create an impenetrable armor for yourself. Only then can others not catch your mistakes. Remember, in this world, only yourself is reliable and trustworthy." Yu Qinghuan, Chang Suntao growled softly, "When I was speaking, you were so asleep that you dared to snore." Chapter 9. Painful Blind Servant. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Yu Qinghuan was startled and looked at him with some embarrassment. He awkwardly smiled and said, "The carriage is very comfortable, and your voice is beautiful. I couldn't control it for a moment." "What did you say just now?" Chang Suntao suppressed the urge to strangle her and said with a black face, "I was just asking you, how could you be a weak and foolish rascal like these rumored concubines of the Prime Minister's mansion?" Yu Qinghuan, who was scolded as a rascal, gritted her teeth and said, "My mother was raised by my father when he was released to serve as an official. It wasn't until I was 8 years old that my mother and I were brought back to the Prime Minister's mansion. Before the age of 8, my mother and I lived with my grandfather in Jingzhou. My grandfather was a well-known doctor in Jingzhou, and he passed on all his medical skills to me. After returning to the Prime Minister's mansion, I have been secretly learning because I am not conspicuous in the Prime Minister's mansion, so no one knows about these things. As for the daughter of the Prime Minister's mansion, there will naturally be people to teach me, but I don't want anyone to know what I am actually learning. They are all fast and learn better than them all." After a moment of silence, Chang Suntao said, "If you don't deliberately conceal it, the most beautiful young lady in the Prime Minister's mansion should not be the eldest daughter Yu Qinghuan, but you." Yu Qinghuan smiled bitterly and said, "In the Prime Minister's mansion, my grandfather was dominant, my grandmother was biased, my father was cowardly, and my legitimate mother was domineering. In this situation, there was really no need to snatch the attention of my elder sister. Even if my talent was known to others, it was just a little more useful. After all, with my status there, no matter how outstanding I was just an unpopular and unloved commoner." After speaking, Yu Qinghuan looked at Chang Suntao. She didn't hide anything, but how much he believed in his words however, she still couldn't understand this man. This feeling is like looking at the sky above, clear and blue at a glance, but unable to see the edge. Chang Suntao just asked lightly, "Why is it no longer converging now?" Without any trace on his face, Yu Qing smiled and said, "Prince, I am now Princess Qi, not a commoner of the Yu family. Why should I be a person with my tail between my legs?" Chang Suntao looked at her and joked, "You don't want to marry me, do you? You even threw yourself into the pond to refuse marriage. Playing tricks on people, who wouldn't know you." Qinghuan widened her black and white eyes, her long eyelashes flickering as she looked at him. The 2 pair curls on her lips were faintly visible, and she said, "Prince, did anyone tell you not to be too curious about a woman, otherwise you will be obsessed and unable to extricate yourself?" In the next moment, Chang Suntao suddenly reached out and grabbed her arm, pulling her into his arms. His lips were pressed against her ear, and he raised a hint of a smile. "Empress Ai, did anyone tell you not to kick your nose or face in front of me, because that would result in only one word, death?" After speaking, Chang Suntao mercilessly pushed Yu Qinghuan away and got off the carriage first. Yu Qinghuan picked up a book and threw it away casually, saying, "Are you sick? My grandson is 3 years old." Ji Ju. Xiao Qian and Levi welcomed them. Xiao Qian skillfully changed clothes for Yu Qinghuan and reorganized her hair bun. Xiao Qian followed her when she was in Jingzhou, loyal and considerate, but not agile enough. To establish a firm foothold in the Huang mansion, Chang Suantao's trust is certainly on one hand, but holding on to the power within the mansion is on the other hand. But to achieve twice the result with half the effort, there must be reliable people. Qinghuan set his gaze on Levi, who was a maid personally assigned by Chang Suantao and reportedly bestowed upon him by the Empress Dowager. However, from her joyful expression, it doesn't seem like the spy sent by Chang Suantao to keep an eye on her. Perhaps it can be cultivated and cultivated. If it cannot be used for oneself, then remove the thorn from her body to avoid stung oneself. Levi, go and fetch a basin of hot water for my queen yourself. My queen needs to wash her hands, Qinghuan instructed casually. Greenie reluctantly left, and in no time, he brought a pot of steaming hot water and slammed it in front of Qinghuan, splashing out a little hot water. Please ask the queen to wash her hands. Qinghuan reached out to test the water temperature and suddenly overturned the basin. The water splashed onto Greenie's feet, causing her to scream in pain. Levi, this is called lifting a stone to hit your own foot, Qing laughed happily. You dare to bring up such hot water. Do you want to scald my queen to death? Greenie's eyes immediately turned red, tears kept spinning, but she refused to let them fall, exuding a unique charm of pear blossoms with rain. Qinghuan stared at her and said, since you were sent by the prince to be with my queen, you are naturally a first-class girl who knows how to stop living. You can't even do such a small thing well, and what you lose is my queen's face. My queen loves face the most. Whoever dares to make me lose face, I will make her lose skin. You can try it. Greenie lowered her head and bit her lips, concealing her anger. Chapter 10. What are you doing? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Have a full meal. Qinghuan changed into a moon-colored white embroidered floating cloud skirt, and a jade hairpin was slanted on the black bun. The jade was of high quality, with a transparent color and a clear jade marrow, as if a wisp of cold smoke was lingering on it. Qinghuan looked at Levi, his lips curved slightly and said, my queen wants to take a walk and eat. You can take me for a leisurely stroll. Levi bit her lip and said, Empress Dowager, I apologize for Levi's discomfort and cannot agree. Qinghuan looked at Levi quietly and suddenly laughed, Levi, why doesn't my queen know that there is a rule in the Qi prince's mansion that a servant can refuse the master? In the palace, Lve only listens to the instructions of the Empress Dowager, while in the palace, Lve only listens to the instructions of the prince, said Lve with a disdainful expression. Qing's laughter remained unchanged, and she hugged her hands and circled around Lve, saying softly, so, if my queen wants to command you, she must first ask the prince's meaning, Lve. In this Jiji residence, my queen is the master and you are the servant. I sit on your knees, and my queen's orders are your will. You have no right to refuse. Levi bit her lower lip to death, feeling the pressure of hierarchy in status. Even if she was unwilling, she couldn't muster the courage to resist. In the end, she still took Qinghuan for a walk in the royal mansion. She dragged her scalded feet, every step in agony, cursing from the bottom of her heart, only hoping that Qinghuan would rest and return early. However, Qinghuan remained enthusiastic, chatting with Shao Qian while admiring the scenery in the royal mansion. 2 hours have passed. Qinghuan turned her head and looked at Levi with a smile on her face. Levi, how does it taste? Greenie instinctively wanted to retort, but when he met Qinghuan's gaze, his body shook heavily and he couldn't help but tremble. She finally understood that Princess Qi was beating her, and if she had any dissatisfaction, she was likely to continue wandering around. The heart-wrenching pain on her feet made her eyes turn black, gradually eroding her pride. Finally, she lowered her stubborn head and said, Princess Qi, please spare me. Qinghuan raised her lips and said, my queen asked you to take a walk, but you tried every means to pass the buck. Now that you've tasted the bitterness, I just asked my queen to spare you. Levi, don't you think you're the master of my queen, thinking that everything should be up to you? Levi bit her lip and said, I dare not. Yu Qinghuan gave her a faint glance, as if looking at the insignificant dust and grass. She rolled up her sleeves, took steps, and continued walking. Greenie followed cautiously behind with red eyes, afraid to have any more thoughts of dissatisfaction. The golden darkness sinks in the west, and the twilight gathers in all directions. Levi finally couldn't bear it any more and passed out with a thrust of her eyes. Yu Qinghuan chuckled lightly and ordered, "Xiao Qian, find someone to carry Levi back to Jiji residence. You can watch for yourself." Xiao Qian found someone to take Greenie back, while Yu Qinghuan continued to wander in the mansion. While there was no one around, she quickly found a place to sit down, took off her shoes, and vigorously rubbed her sore feet. "Mu Wu Ju." Xia Yun hugged her hand and leaned against the door frame, teasing, "Your queen is punishing the people you sent over. Don't go and take a look." Chang Sun Tao looked up and said, "Oh, how can we rectify it?" Xia Yun deliberately played a trick before saying, "I haven't really dealt with it. I just injured that little girl first, and then let the little girl take her to the royal mansion." Chang Sun Tao flipped through the pages of the book and said calmly, "Let her do. Instead of watching two women compete and become jealous in the palace, you'd better keep an eye on the movements in the palace. The matter of the little princess must not affect the Qi prince's mansion again." Xia Yun leisurely clasped her fists and arched her hands, then retreated. Chang Sun Tao flipped through a few pages of the book, and his mind flashed over Yu Qinghuan's spirited expression. He couldn't read any of the content that could have been flipped back and forth in the book, so he threw it down and left the study. "My lord's mansion, Empress Dowager AI, has figured out almost everything." Suddenly, a cool and moist voice sounded. Yu Qinghuan covered his feet and slowly looked up, only to see Chang Sun Tao standing under a flower tree, with his immaculate clothes, pendants, jade ribbons, embroidered black bamboo collar, and a face as cold as a white wall. Yu Qinghuan calmed down and put on his shoes slowly, showing a sweet smile at him. "I have clumsy eyes, but I can only see that the guards in other parts of the Huang mansion are loose. On the other hand, Shu Qingyuan's defense is extremely tight." Chang Sun Tao narrowed his eyes, his expression as cold as ice, and said, "What else do you know? If you don't know anything, does he believe it? He originally didn't believe anyone. At least except for Xia Yun, the Chang Sun Tao and his biological mother whom he saw deliberately kept a distance of 1 foot, because only in this way can he have a sense of security from being violated. To get to know someone better, one must first dissect oneself to make the other person think they understand oneself. Because sometimes only secrets can be exchanged for secrets." Yu Qinghuan blinked her eyes and said frankly, "I still smell a faint medicinal smell. Although it has been diluted by the incense in the royal mansion, upon closer inspection, I can still smell it." "What are you doing?" In the next moment, her slender and powerful hand gripped her delicate neck.